Do you know what the worth of a man's rebellion is? Not in poetry. Not in myth. But in coin, in cold, indifferent silver. 61 shillings. That was the price set upon William Wallace's head. A sum so pitiful, so insulting, that it stripped the Scottish knight of the legend he would become and reduced him, in the eyes of the English crown, to a commodity, no more sacred than cattle. 61 shillings. That is the measure of treachery, of betrayal, of blood. And it is here, in this number, that the true horror begins. August, 1305. London is alive with noise, merchants shouting their wares, iron hooves striking the cobblestones, the stench of sweat and smoke thick in the air. But beneath it all, a darker rhythm is building. Crowds gather in anticipation, their excitement tinged with cruelty. They are not here for trade. They are here for theater. A theater of death. The man they came to see was once flesh and fire, a symbol of defiance against tyranny. But today, William Wallace will be transformed into something else, a lesson carved into blood and bone, an eternal warning to anyone foolish enough to imagine that one man could defy an empire. The execution that awaited him was no mere killing. It was ritual. A carefully designed act of state terror. Hanging, drawing, quartering, the trinity of medieval cruelty. But before the blade, before the fire, before the hooks and ropes, Wallace was already being murdered in another way, through humiliation, degradation, the stripping away of his humanity, piece by piece, until even the crowd no longer saw a man, but a traitor, an animal, a shadow of rebellion crushed under the weight of English steel. Yet here lies the truth they never told you. Wallace did not walk into that arena alone. His death was not his death. It was the death of an idea, the execution of hope itself. Longshanks, King Edward I, understood this. He knew that a sword could kill a body, but only spectacle could kill a symbol. And so he bought Wallace, not with justice, not with honor, but with 61 shillings of betrayal. A number that still stinks of corruption, still whispers from the grave, still dares to ask every man who hears it, what is the price of your freedom? Betrayal is never clean. It doesn't come with trumpets, or banners, or open daggers in the daylight. No, it seeps in quietly, through whispers, through bribes, through the trembling hands of men who once swore loyalty but now tremble before the shadow of power. And it was betrayal that delivered William Wallace into the hands of the English. Not battlefield defeat. Not exhaustion. Betrayal. For years, Wallace had fought like a ghost, slipping through forests and hills, striking the English where they thought themselves untouchable. He was more than a soldier, he was a living myth, a reminder that Scotland had not yet bowed its neck. But even myths bleed. Even symbols grow hunted. By 1305, Wallace was alone, abandoned by many of the same nobles who had once sworn fealty to his cause. They had bent the knee to Edward, preferring gold and survival over the uncertainty of rebellion. And so Wallace's name became not a banner to rally behind, but a curse whispered in the dark. The betrayal came, as it so often does, from within. Sir John de Menteith, a Scottish knight, a countryman, handed him over. Not the English. Not strangers. His own blood. His own soil. And for what? The promise of Edward's favor, perhaps coin, perhaps the silence of a sword held at his throat. History records only the act, not the weight of his shame. But think on this, 61 shillings. That was the bounty. That was the sum that made a man sell his country's hope. When Wallace was captured near Glasgow, he was not treated as a prisoner of war. He was paraded like a beast. Shackled, mocked, dragged from town to town so the people could spit on him, laugh at him, watch their children throw refuse in his face. This was not transport. This was psychological warfare. The English understood that to kill a man's spirit before killing his flesh was the ultimate conquest. And so Wallace was marched southward, day by day, not as a warrior but as a warning. Every cobblestone his chains scraped, every jeer he endured, was part of a theatre written long before he arrived in London. Understand this, the betrayal of Wallace was not a single act. It was a system. A design. A method of control that has echoed across history. They don't just kill rebels. They make the people participate in their destruction. They turn neighbor against neighbor, ally against ally, until rebellion rots from within. And when Wallace finally stood in Westminster Hall, facing charges spoken in a language he did not even know, he must have realized the darkest truth of all: he was already dead. His body just hadn't caught up yet. August 23, 1305. Westminster Hall. Imagine it, the largest hall in England, cavernous, echoing with the shuffle of boots, the murmur of lords, the crackle of torches burning too bright. This was not a court of law. This was a stage. And William Wallace was not a defendant. He was the performance. They charged him with treason. Treason, against Edward of England. Do you hear the irony? Wallace had never sworn fealty to Edward. He was not Edward's subject. In truth, Wallace owed that king nothing but his blade. But logic does not matter in such places. The law is not written for the people. It is written for the crown. It bends not to truth, but to power. Wallace was condemned before he ever entered the hall. The proceedings were read in Latin. Wallace, a man of Scotland, likely did not understand a word. Think about that for a moment, his fate sealed in a language foreign to his tongue, as if to remind him that he was already erased, already silenced, already consumed by the machine of empire. This is how control works. Strip away the voice, bury the meaning, replace justice with ritual. The trial was not for him. It was for the crowd. It was for the scribes. It was for history. When they asked for his plea, Wallace spoke. And here, for one brief moment, the stage cracked. I could not be a traitor to Edward, he declared, for I was never his subject. A simple truth, sharper than any sword. But truth, in the wrong hands, becomes useless. The judges, all appointed by Edward, ignored him. They did not need a verdict. They already had a sentence. Hanging, drawing, quartering. Each word a tool, each punishment a message. To hang him, but not until death, to choke the spirit without releasing it. To draw him, dragged naked through the streets, a spectacle of shame. To quarter him, the body divided into four, scattered across the land, so that even in death he could not be whole. Do you see the genius? It was not execution. It was annihilation. Wallace was to be dismantled not only as a man, but as an idea. This is the deeper truth: Edward understood rebellion is not killed with swords. Rebellion is killed with memory. And so he built a death so grotesque, so unforgettable, that its echoes would bleed through centuries. Wallace was not on trial. Scotland was. And Edward's sentence was meant to burn itself into the minds of every man, woman, and child: resist us, and we will not just end you. We will unmake you. The morning was warm, the sky deceptively clear. But the streets of London were heavy with anticipation, with the buzzing hunger of thousands waiting not for bread, not for prayer, but for blood. They called it justice. In truth, it was entertainment. Wallace was dragged from the Tower of London, not walking, not riding, but bound to a hurdle, a rough wooden frame tethered to horses. His body scraped against cobblestones as he was pulled through the city's busiest streets. Do you see the design? This was no accident. The route was carefully chosen. Every market, every square, every crossroads filled with onlookers. He was to be paraded, not executed. His body became a moving banner, not of freedom, but of defeat. Children threw stones. Vendors sold ale and pies as if it were a festival. Women spat, men jeered, soldiers forced the crowd closer so none could look away. This was not a moment of solemn law. It was a carnival of cruelty, a ritual humiliation meant to strip away the last fragments of his humanity. The message was simple: this man is no hero. He is a beast. Laugh at him. Mock him. Learn from him. And never, never follow his path. But here is the paradox. In trying to erase him, they etched him deeper into the soul of every witness. For even as Wallace's flesh tore against stone, even as the mob screamed their hatred, many eyes could not look away from his silence. Accounts tell us he did not beg. He did not cry out. He fixed his gaze on some distant point, as if he could already see beyond this world. And that quiet defiance, in the middle of degradation, burned brighter than their jeers. Understand this: humiliation is one of the oldest tools of power. To kill a man is simple. To make him despised, to make him mocked, to twist his image into a warning, that is conquest. The rulers of this world have always known it. They don't just take lives. They take symbols. They take memory. They take truth. And they turn it inside out until the people themselves celebrate their own enslavement. As Wallace's broken body reached Smithfield, where the scaffold waited, London roared in anticipation. To them, it was a holiday. To Edward, it was victory. But to Wallace, to the man chained, bloodied, stripped bare, this was the final test. He would not just die. He would be unmade in front of thousands. And yet, in his silence, in his refusal to break, a seed of rebellion was being sown that no rope, no flame, no quartered limb could ever fully kill. Smithfield. The air stank of sweat, smoke, and anticipation. Thousands pressed forward, climbing on carts, shoving through the crowd, desperate to see every cut, every scream. This was no solemn punishment. It was a feast of cruelty, a ritual sacrifice dressed as law. And at its center, William Wallace, bound, stripped, broken but not bowed. The executioner stepped forward. He was not a man of mercy. He was a craftsman of agony, trained to prolong life just long enough for the spectacle to etch itself into memory. First came the hanging. Wallace was hoisted by the neck, the rope taut, his body convulsing in that universal dance of strangulation. The crowd cheered as his face darkened, as his chest heaved for air that would not come. But death was not the plan. Just before the shadow claimed him, the rope was cut. Wallace fell, gasping, still alive, still conscious. The execution was only beginning. Next came the knife. His abdomen was slit open, deliberate, slow. His organs pulled out, held high, displayed to the mob like trophies. Imagine it, your very soul, the seat of your being, dragged into daylight while your eyes remain open. Each piece burned in the fire before him, as if to say, even your compassion, even your humanity, we will destroy. The stench of burning flesh mingled with the roar of the crowd, an atmosphere of hell crafted not for Wallace alone, but for everyone watching. This was not execution. This was indoctrination through terror. And still, he did not break. Witnesses say his eyes never closed. No pleading. No surrender. What kind of will does it take for a man to endure such a death? The kind that frightens kings. The kind that cannot be quartered by axes or silenced by flame. Finally, the blade struck his neck. Swift, merciful compared to the torment that preceded it. His head was raised to the crowd, dripping, bloody, the last vestige of his body claimed as a trophy. The cheers rose like thunder. But the work was not finished. His corpse was hacked into quarters, each piece to be scattered across Scotland. Do you see the brilliance of Edward's cruelty? Even in death, Wallace would be denied wholeness. His body became a map of submission, nailed into towns as a living reminder of empire's reach. But here is the secret the king could never control: in tearing him apart, they made him unforgettable. In silencing him, they carved his voice into eternity. This is the paradox of tyranny. The more brutally they try to erase a man, the deeper his shadow is burned into the fabric of time. The execution was over. The crowd had eaten its fill of blood, laughter, and terror. But Edward's theater did not end with Wallace's last breath. No, the true play had only just begun. His head, tarred and blackened, was mounted on a spike above London Bridge, staring down upon all who entered the city. 4/4 of his body were carried north, parcelled like butchered meat, displayed in Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth. Each fragment was a message. Each piece was propaganda carved in human flesh. The brilliance of it, if we dare call such darkness brilliant, was in its symbolism. His body was no longer his. It belonged to the Empire, to the story Edward wanted told. A man once whole, now divided. A nation once rising, now broken. The crowd was meant to see not courage, not sacrifice, but futility. The message, resist us, and this is your fate. Resist us, and you will be reduced to nothing but fragments, scattered to the wind. And yet, this act of desecration carried a poison hidden inside its cruelty. For while Edward believed he was erasing Wallace, he was engraving him. Every severed piece, every spike, every smoldering organ, it was unforgettable. Wallace's body was torn apart, but his image was burned into the memory of every man who saw it. Even centuries later, his execution lives not as an English victory, but as a Scottish legend. That is the paradox of terror. What is meant to silence often becomes the loudest echo. But we must return to that number. 61 shillings. That was the price set upon Wallace's head. Think about the insult buried in that sum. Not gold. Not wealth. Barely more than the cost of a good horse. That was what his life, his rebellion, his sacrifice was reduced to on paper. Do you see the manipulation? It wasn't just a bounty. It was humiliation codified into coin. They wanted his worth measured not in glory, not in legend, but in silver weighed out by trembling hands. And here lies the darker truth, this is how power works. Every empire, every system of control, has always sought to reduce men of vision to commodities. They turn heroes into criminals, rebels into corpses, sacrifice into currency. And the people, ordinary men, are made to believe the price is just. This is the great lie of history. That freedom can be measured, bought, or sold. Edward believed he had bought silence for 61 shillings. What he truly purchased was immortality. Not for himself. For Wallace. For rebellion. For the very flame he thought he had extinguished. Step back. Forget the screams. Forget the fire and the rope. Forget Wallace's body for a moment. See instead the machinery. What happened at Smithfield was not random. It was ritual. A carefully crafted display designed to do more than kill a man. It was engineered to mold minds, to control memory, to forge obedience. Look closely, the humiliation parade through London, the staged agony of the execution, the scattering of his remains, these were not punishments. They were symbols. Each act was a chapter in a script. The ruling elite knew exactly what they were doing. They understood something most men never grasp: power is not maintained by swords or armies alone. Power endures by shaping perception. By mastering the theater of fear. The public execution was their screen. The body was their canvas. The audience, the people, were the ones being altered. It was not Wallace on trial. It was Scotland. It was the human will to resist. And through fire and steel, they were teaching a lesson: do not rise. Do not question. Or this will be your fate. Do you see the structure? It is the same across all ages. Crucifixion in Rome. Witch burnings in Europe. Guillotines in France. Lynchings in America. Different eras. Different tools. Same design. The body becomes a billboard. Pain becomes propaganda. Death becomes the loudspeaker of the state. But here is where the secret sharpens. These spectacles are never just about one man. They are about programming the masses. Every scream teaches obedience. Every spike instills submission. Every coin offered for betrayal tells the people that loyalty is worthless, and survival comes only through surrender. This is psychological warfare, not waged in secret rooms, but in open squares, in broad daylight, with cheering crowds complicit in their own enslavement. And yet, there is always a fracture in the plan. For as much as rulers try to weaponize death, the human spirit can turn their theater upside down. Wallace was meant to be erased. Instead, his death became a symbol far larger than his life. Every child who whispered his name, every rebel who remembered his silence at the scaffold, carried forward a spark the king could not extinguish. This is the double-edged sword of tyranny. Control requires spectacle, but spectacle cannot be forgotten. And memory, once seated, grows beyond the grasp of kings. History pretends events are isolated. Wallace at Smithfield. Witches at the stake. Rebels at the gallows. But when you strip away the costumes of time, you see the same hand, writing the same script, century after century. Rome perfected it first. Crucifixion, a death so slow, so humiliating, that it broke not just the body but the spirit of all who watched. Thousands lined the Appian Way, nailed to crosses, their suffering stretched over days. Rome wasn't killing criminals. Rome was broadcasting obedience. This is what happens if you resist Caesar. And the message worked, until one crucifixion inverted the script, and a carpenter's death became a symbol more powerful than the empire itself. Centuries later, Europe rekindled the theater of fire. The witch trials. Women tied to stakes, set ablaze in town squares, their screams carried by the wind. Again, the lesson was not about witchcraft. It was about conformity. Step outside the doctrine, question the priesthood, defy the crown, and you will burn. The flames were never for the accused. They were for the crowd. To terrify, to discipline, to domesticate the imagination of an entire population. The French Revolution, too, offered its spectacle. The guillotine. Clean, efficient, theatrical. Heads lifted high before the mob, dripping with the same message: power decides who is human, who is disposable. Even in the so-called Age of Enlightenment, the stage of terror endured. Different blade. Same script. And across the ocean, the American South. Lynchings carried out under trees, postcards made from corpses, bodies hung as warnings. Again, the cruelty was not for the victim alone. It was performance. A ritual of fear to cement hierarchy, to remind every witness where power resided, and where resistance would lead. Do you see it now? Wallace was not just a man. He was part of a system. A lineage of engineered horrors designed to weaponize memory, to carve obedience into entire civilizations. The scaffold, the stake, the cross, the rope, they are not instruments of justice. They are technologies of control. And here is the forbidden truth: the stage has never been dismantled. It has only changed shape. The gallows became the prison cell. The stake became the firing squad. The cross became the black site. The lynching tree became the digital screen. The principle is eternal: rule through spectacle, mold the crowd with fear. Wallace's body was quartered in 1305. But the system that tore him apart, that system is still alive. The mistake most people make is thinking the gallows are gone. That we have outgrown the scaffold, the fire, the rope. But power never abandons a tool that works. It only refines it. It makes the spectacle quieter, cleaner, hidden behind polished glass and polite words. Yet the psychology is the same. Look closely at the modern world. Public executions have been replaced with televised trials, perp walks, and mugshots that circle the globe within hours. The condemned are paraded before cameras, not crowds. The scaffold has simply been digitized. We do not watch bodies burn in the square, we watch reputations incinerated in the media. The principle is unchanged, destruction as theater, the individual sacrifice to teach the masses obedience. Consider the prison system. Once, rulers quartered bodies to scatter rebellion. Now, they scatter lives in cages, hidden behind concrete walls. The message is quieter, but no less sharp: defy the system, and you will be erased, your existence reduced to a number, your identity swallowed by a uniform. It is Wallace's head on the spike, translated into paperwork, into bureaucracy, into silence. And then, the greatest innovation, the spectacle of fear turned invisible. Surveillance. Propaganda. The manipulation of perception. No longer must they hang bodies to remind us of power. Now they hang ideas. Careers destroyed with one accusation. Movements shattered with one label. Nations disciplined through a single image broadcast on a screen. The crowd still gathers. The crowd still learns obedience. But now the crowd believes it is free. This is the genius of modern empire. Where Edward had to stain the cobblestones with blood, today's rulers can destroy a man without ever drawing a blade. They can exile him in plain sight, smother him under the weight of ridicule, censorship, silence. And the people themselves, the spectators, become participants, mocking, jeering, amplifying the spectacle without ever realizing they are actors in the same ancient play. Do you understand the continuity? Wallace's execution was not history's cruelty. It was history's prototype. From crucifixions to witch burnings, from lynchings to cancel culture, the core is the same. Control through spectacle. Fear as theater. Death, whether of body, of reputation, or of truth, turned into propaganda. We tell ourselves we are modern, enlightened, liberated. But in reality, we are still gathered at Smithfield, still watching Wallace torn apart, only now the blood is digital, the stakes invisible, the screams muted behind polite language. The executioner never left. He simply learned how to hide his axe. The darkest truth is this: the scaffold does not stand because kings demand it. It stands because the crowd gathers. Power is never maintained by the few. It survives because the many consent to their own chains. And they do so not reluctantly, but eagerly, with shouts, with applause, with coins tossed at the feet of the executioner. Why? Why do men and women, bound by the same fear, cheer when another is torn apart? The answer lies in psychology, in the architecture of obedience buried deep within the human animal. Fear alone is not enough. Fear paralyzes. But fear mixed with ritual, with belonging, with the feeling of safety in the crowd, that becomes control. Look at Smithfield again. Wallace chained, bleeding, broken. But around him, thousands of ordinary Londoners, laughing, pointing, jeering. They are not kings. They are not lords. They are people, bakers, merchants, children. Yet they howl for blood as if the destruction of one man secures their own survival. This is the trick. The spectacle transfers terror into relief. As long as it is him, it is not me. The victim becomes the lightning rod. The crowd feels cleansed. Safe. United. This is why rulers stage these horrors in public. Not just to crush the rebel, but to bind the crowd together in complicity. The people themselves become the prison bars. They enforce the silence. They pass down the fear. They repeat the lesson to their children: never resist, never step out of line, or you will be next. And the cruelest twist, the victim, once destroyed, becomes a kind of offering. A sacrifice that renews the power of the rulers and the obedience of the people. Ancient kings had altars of blood. Modern kings have courts, prisons, media. Different altars. Same ritual. Understand this: the crowd is not innocent. Every cheer at a hanging, every whisper at a trial, every click on a headline of someone's ruin, all of it feeds the machinery. Obedience is not imposed from above. It is grown from below, seated in the hearts of ordinary men who would rather see another destroyed than risk their own suffering. This is why Wallace's silence at the scaffold was more dangerous than any weapon. He refused to give the crowd the theater they wanted. No pleas. No tears. Only defiance. In that silence, he broke the script. He revealed the spectacle for what it was, not justice, but mass hypnosis. And here is the question that lingers: how many of us today still play the same role? How often do we cheer another's destruction, thinking it protects us, when in truth it tightens the noose around us all?